Ce que j'appelle un événement est quelque chose de plus fort, de plus violent que le récit biographique. Ce que j'appelle un événement, c'est une coupure. C'est donc cette part de l'existence qui est imprévisible, vraiment, qui n'est pas calculable à partir des lois du monde dans lequel il se produit. Toute création véritable commence par un événement. Parce que si elle ne commence pas par un événement, ça veut dire qu'elle ne fait que continuer ce qu'il y avait déjà. Donc ce n'est pas une vraie création. Donc l'événement, c'est de ce point de vue-là la source des vérités. Finalement, faire avec une biographie transformée, où c'est une histoire transformée. Il y a avant et il y a après.
Once his hand is in and out of the frame, then we can interrupt.
Yeah, or just
we just need the transitions, basically.
Sure, but I mean also the video should be good.
Continuous, you think?
Sure.
Okay, then we can.
And then we can take pictures at the end.
Okay. And in that case.
My birth is in Morocco, Rabat, Morocco, at the beginning of 1937. The Morocco occupied by France. I have been practically educated by Arabic women in the kitchen of the house. What is a woman? What is a woman? And it's a very dramatic question for a boy. Is the woman exclusively my mother? Maybe exists something else which is also a woman. It's a Freudian question, you know. Why this woman were in the kitchen and my mother in the big, magnificent rooms of our house? Without understanding all that, I understand something of the inequality, the difference between the white colonialists and all the people. It would be for me, in my and conscious itself. Something like the birth of the question of the other. I was in school, I was excellent. I was always the first of the class. And so it's a good moment of my life, except naturally the relationship with my mother, which was particularly bad. I think my mother was melancholic at the end, a mixture of hysteria and melancholy. And she prefers my brother. It was my terrible pain during my childhood. My mother prefers my brother. I was jealous. Maybe I write books, philosophical engagement, political engagement, and finally to be glorious, all that to seduce my mother. But my mother was never seduced. My father was practically absent, something like a sort of abstraction. They were profound lovers. It was a true love. But my father sometimes was seduced by some other woman. You know, when we are a child, all that is obscure, completely obscure. My brother was, he was something like a police for me. It was always saying to me, do that, our mother, I said, you do, absolutely go, and so on. When I was a child, my relation to him was a sort of indifference. We were in two different worlds, finally. And I am sad of all that because now I love my brother, simply. There is something in the life of my brother which has been too easy in childhood. It was, in fact, the result of the love of my mother for him. And I observed that this result was not so good, finally, because my brother was really melancholic. For him, childhood was paradise. But after that, is paradise lost, naturally. And for me, on the contrary, I can say really, rationally, that the best moment of my life is now. From many countries come the demand to travel, to go here and there and so on. And that sort of international nomadism of philosophy today. And I have given many lectures in United Kingdom, Germany, Switzerland, Denmark, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Morocco, Slovenia, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Venezuela, Korea, Australia, and so on. I hate travels, in fact. It's a common point with Deleuze. Deleuze was not at all a traveler, but Deleuze was more systematic than me, because the consequence was he does not travel. Me, I am not a traveler, but I am always in traveling. It's a contradiction. I am a sedentary, and my duty is to be a nomad. My very nature is to be still in a quiet place, writing a play or a novel. My duty of philosopher is to address to everybody. And everybody today is everybody in the world. The cave of Plato, the famous cave of Plato. Take the cave as the metaphor of the world in its normal, oppressive, obscure situation. So the world as it is. The world where there exists oppression, division, rich and poor, and so on. What Plato explained is that you can find an exit. The exit is something that you find by chance, practically always. Revolt, new invention, love encounter, unpredictable. And what Plato says that progressively, the idea is the discovery of a new meaning of the world. You see something of the truth of the world, which was invisible when you were in the cave. And from outside the cave, you understand that you were in the cave. When you are in the cave, you don't know that you are in the cave. And Plato described magnificently, you see the trees, you see the sky, and finally you see the sun. And the sun is the metaphor of the idea. That is, it's the idea of what is the true nature of the cave, what is the true nature of the world. And Plato, at this moment, said, what you must do with all that, with the idea. We must return to the cave. You must return to the cave. To do what? Then to organize the exit. First, you have had the chance to find the exit, and your duty is to return to the cave, to organize the exit of all people of the cave. Not for some aristocratic minority of the cave, but for the great masses of the cave. And this movement is politics. To be or not to be? That is the question. Whether it's noble to accept slayings and heroes of outrageous fortune, or to have written 7 plays, and last year in Avignon, my realization of the Republic of Plato, of the Plato's Republic, becomes a sort of new theater, and it has been a big success. And so I have 2 pictures of the realizations of Plato's Republic. I play Socrates. When I was 15 years old, my idea was to become an actor and not at all a philosopher. But maybe a philosopher is always, in some sense, an actor. It's something like a new birth. You go to the stage and you must become something else. And you can see in the audience if you are good or bad. I think that every young boys and girls must do some forms of theater to experiment what is the moment where we must go beyond the fear, precisely. And so the theater is also a school of courage. It's a school of courage. It's my conviction. C'est pas d'accord, c'est ça. Ça, c'est contemporain, ça. Oui, oui.
C'est pas celle-là qui est plus intéressante.
Ouais.
Non. C'est pas celle-là.
Celui-là, il est d'accord. Oui, you are here in the contradictions in contemporary art. What is really striking is the complete difference of style between the 3. Here, something like an allegoric vision of the sadness of humanity and the indifference of nature, of animals, and so on. And there is something enigmatic too. What the painting is the narrative of that sort of mysterious meaning, but too allegoric, too narrative for me. This one is a search of pure beauty, finally, pure beauty. The sky and the autumn of trees, and naturally with the very violent effect of the disproportion between the sky and the trees. The sky being, in some sense, the ultimate determination of all what exists. The nuance of the blue, the yellow, the orange of the trees, and so on. But, in my opinion, it's an excellent exercise, no more. This one, finally, is much more in the abstract tradition, which is, in some sense, not exactly abstract, because we can see something in the painting. The allusion or the possible reality of a landscape. And the light is very subtle. The painting changes. It's not static. It's a very good picture. To be just, I must insist on this point. Many determination of my intellectual nature are coming from my mother. Don't reduce my mother to a negative polarity of my life. It's due to my mother the possibility to create conceptual fictions or narrative fictions. My mother was Wagnerian, and I am too. I love Wagner too. As you know, Hitler himself was a fanatic Wagnerian. It's a point we very often discuss with my friend Slavoj Žižek. And it's very strange in some sense that the two maybe communist philosophers of today are also the two Wagnerian philosophers. We must give proofs that Wagner is not a proto-fascist musician, but really, finally, a revolutionary musician. During the summer of 1952, I was in Beirut, and I see and I heard some work of Wagner in the realization of Wieland Wagner. You can see me, my father here, my mother here. Wieland Wagner was a son of Wagner. And so it was a very abstract realization, my first encounter with very modern theater, without any relationship with the past, the terrible past of Germany. My first strong experience of Wagner has been the experience something near the Greek tragedy, something completely abstract and universal. The idea of Hitler was that the greatness of Germany was the greatness of racial and political determination. All that is finally pure destruction. And I go to Wagner across the destruction. I was in car with my father and my mother, and we go across Germany to go to Bayreuth, and we pass by Nuremberg, Munich, and so on. I am a very strong memory of our arrival to Munich. It was my first experience of what is a town completely destroyed by the war. And practically all the big towns of Germany have been destroyed, first by the bombing, and after that by the war itself. I retroactively understand the potency of the war, the possibility, the modern possibility to destroy really maybe the world itself. When there is a war somewhere, we must have the idea that the war is really something terrible, and with the new means of destruction is much more terrible than ever. And we were in a town of the south of France, the name of which is Toulouse. And in this town, my father has been, from the very beginning of the war, a resistant against the Nazi. Even my mother does not know everything. Because if somebody was arrested, he was tortured, sometimes before the family, and the best was the silence on all facts. But sometimes something was strange for me. My father was not here. Where is my father? And my mother was saying, your father is occupied. But I was in the idea that she lied. And so the resistance were a small minority against a very strong dominant opinion, which was, after all, peace is better than war. Well, at any price. And my father, naturally, was on the other side. We must resist at any price, too. The day of the liberation of Toulouse, I see my father at the balcony of the city hall. He has been appointed mayor of Toulouse. It was impressive for the young boy. My father finally is at the balcony of the city hall only because his conviction and his fight. After that, you can imagine the difference between me when I was 17 year old and now. And Meg, sin, yes. I was great and sin, and I was redder, really, like fire. And I smoke, not sometimes, but every time. 2 packets of cigarettes by day during 50 years or more. So I was an elegant young man, smoking and redder. The discussion concerning the relationship to women, how to encounter a good woman, and so on, was also passionate discussions, naturally. I encounter my first passion, my first great love when I was 18 years old. And I married her 6 years after. Oh. And it's a photo of my first wife, the name of which was Françoise. I encountered her in Toulouse, and we married some years after. And I go to Paris, in École Normale Supérieure. I was just 19 years old. I was not with my parents, I was not in Toulouse, I was in the big Paris and so on, and with the intellectual activities, with Althusser, Lacan, and so on and so on and so on. It was really the end of the 50s and the beginning of the 60s. Françoise was also with me in Paris, and it is a beautiful picture of lovers. Lovers during the 60s in Paris. And she studies mathematics, Françoise. And after that, she has been a psychanalyst, in fact. There is infinite differences between two persons. Eventually of different sex or the same sex. It's not the point. In some sense, two individuals are always completely different. But the love is a new experience of difference from a point of view of a common vision of the world. There is the creation of two, which in some sense is also a one. Something of yourself must accept entirely the other. And so you have something like a mixture, a strange mixture, very difficult. But you know that love is not simple. After that, I was named as a professor in Reims, in the College of Reims, and after that in the University of Reims. And also, I go to the military obligation. And so, two pictures of my military obligation. It's me. And this one is me. And so I became a glorious flautist in the army. And it was a very singular destiny. L'expérience du monde, c'est constamment l'expérience de la multiplicité. Et parce que, c'est ma thèse philosophique, l'être est multiple. Voilà. Si vous devez lire un livre, vous avez affaire à la multiplicité des pages. Si le livre vous ennuie, vous remarquez qu'il vous reste encore 123 pages à lire. C'est une expérience de la multiplicité. Si vous voulez aller dans la ville de Paris, vous voyez bien qu'il vous faut traverser des tas de rues inconnues avant d'arriver là où vous allez, vous êtes dans la multiplicité. Et si je regarde encore plus près, chacune de ces toutes petites choses écrites, là, c'est à son tour une multiplicité. Il faut faire à des multiplicités, deux multiplicités, deux multiplicités. Le monde peut être vu comme quelque chose qui est à tout instant en train de se démultiplier selon les échelles d'observation qui sont les nôtres. Je dirais même que c'est la première chose que le bébé découvre quand il naît. Hein. Il crie parce qu'il découvre le multiple. Et il commence par comprendre que lui et sa mère, c'est pas la même chose. Et après, ça n'arrêtera plus. Ça n'arrêtera plus. Because the muscles of the lips are not so good, but I was a correct player of flute, yes. And after that, I returned to Reims, and with Françoise, I have two children. My son, Simon, and my daughter, Claude. Oh, it was very difficult because many trouble with my wife. But after that, we have in a small house in the suburb of Reims with a garden and so on. Everybody saw that I was a great professor. I was candidate to elections. La politique, c'est toujours projeté vers le futur. Quand l'organisation de société se transforme toute seule par la tradition, la répétition, on ne peut pas dire qu'il y a vraiment de la politique. Il y a de la gestion, il y a de l'administration, il y a de la tradition. La politique, ça commence quand des gens ont le projet de transformer la société parce qu'ils pensent qu'il y a des injustices, qu'il y a des choses mauvaises, et qu'on peut améliorer ça. C'est l'idée d'une transformation de la société dans un sens plus juste, plus égalitaire, plus libre, plus fraternel. Et puis il y a le côté pratique, c'est-à-dire l'ensemble des moyens qu'il faut créer, organiser, rassembler pour que cette transformation s'inscrive où? Dans l'histoire des hommes. Je cherche un petit peu. Oui, ça on verra après. So just to this one is a picture in Canada, right. And this is me, and this is a very important friend of mine, which is the lawyer Roger Lallemand. And with Roger Lallemand, I have made my two first political travels in the world. The first one has been to go to Camiri in Bolivia when Régis Debray has been arrested because he was with Che Guevara in the fight. We obtained the right to see Régis Debray in the jail. He was really affected. The possibility of a death sentence was real. And the trial was enigmatic. And one day they say that we must return to La Paz. And it was precisely the days where Guevara was murdered, near Camiri. I think that the military faction thought that no witness, no person near. We learn the fact by the newspaper. They explained that Che Guevara had been killed in a fight. Many months after, we learned that it was not true. He has not at all be killed in a fight because they arrested Guevara and they killed him 2 days after in jail. But all that was not in the newspaper. The mountains, the poverty, extreme poverty, the world of Indians, the life of the small white minorities in the bottom of the town. coming from Paris, it's another world, absolutely. Something dangerous, something enigmatic, something obscure. We must be prepared for that sort of situation. Something dangerous, something enigmatic, something obscure. We must be prepared for that sort of situation. Something dangerous, something enigmatic, something obscure. We must be prepared for that sort of situation. Something dangerous, something enigmatic, something obscure. And I observe today, progressively, the world is everywhere the same. It was not the case when I was in Bolivia. The immediate feeling was to be in another country, completely different, completely different. Because in some sense, the expansion, the true expansion of capitalism was not complete. And today, progressively, that sort of difference disappears. We have very poor people, very rich people. We have nations where we have violence and so on. So there are big differences. But that sort of differences are inside the same world. And that they don't create really, like before, the idea of two different horizons, two different perspectives. There is a sort of resignation, a sort of acceptation of the fact that this thing is the same, you know, everywhere. Creation from nothing is a task for a god, but not for a human being. You don't begin from nothing. You begin with a master. master of music, a master of painting, a master of literature, and so on. The question is not to have a master or to not have a master. The question is to have a good master. I read the book of Sartre, Being and Nothingness. And it was like an intellectual revolution for me. It was really the birth of the philosopher. That is, for me, during some years, philosophy was the philosophy of Sartre. Philosophy and Sartre was the same thing. And progressively, inside Sartre, I go beyond Sartre. With Sartre, science was not the question. Mathematics was not the question. The question was the existence as such, the subject, the consciousness, the theory of freedom, radical freedom, and so on. But during the first part of the 60s, there has been a great intellectual change and philosophical change with the development of structuralism, mathematics, new logical frameworks, hard scientific knowledge. It was a reaction against Sartre, against Camus, against the phenomenology, Husserl, Heidegger, and so on. That is a reaction against all my masters. A great philosophy is an attempt to solve a contradiction. And after May 68, my trajectory is in some sense the same. That is to save the figure of the subjectivity inside the context of structures and science. So there is a possible definition of my philosophy is to organize the possibility of a synthesis between Sartre and Plato, which is impossible, but as said from a long time my master Lacan, the impossible is the real. Is an event the end of a difference or a creation of a difference? And so, for Hegel, the history as such is the history of a final unity. And Hegel names this final unity the absolute. It's not really the creation of a new process, but it's the end of a process. The idea of Heidegger, for example, the end of metaphysics. You have also the idea of the end of art, like in Duchamp and some others. And it's a melancholic vision in some sense. The final unity is death. In death, everything are the same. For me, there is always new contradiction, new creation, new inventions, a creative rupture, an affirmative rupture. An event is the birth of something new. May 1968 breaks my life in two parts. And it is why it's, for me, the model of what is an event. My class was on poetry, on Rimbaud, Mallarmé, and Lautréamont. And I explained, Lautréamont certainly said to us, go to the factory and not study my poems. It was a proposition, but the proposition was accepted with enthusiasm by practically all the students, and we go to the protest. And many workers think that it was interesting to discuss with students why students are here. I have really a memory, a strong memory of the first meetings with workers, students, intellectuals, under the common idea that it was the beginning of something completely new. A young student has absolutely no contact at all with maybe the working class. But after 68, we can do what we want. You can go where it's impossible to go, or we can go where we have no reason to go. It was possible to go to a factory, to speak with workers, to organize workers with you, to write some text with them, and so on. We have a new relationship to the world itself, to the complexity of the world. The end of a separated vision of society. And so, during 10 years, I did not write anything. No philosophy, only political activities and discovery of the world. Discovery of the world as it is. The secret of an event is very often not the spectacular form of the event. There is also something more secret in the event, which is its truth, in fact. The secret of May 68 was the politique which is really common to the universal existence of a human being. A new form of what I can name communism, finally. Between 1966 and the middle of the 70s, we have had in China the Cultural Revolution, the beginning of which is the violent rebellion of students. The mass movement of the students against the Vietnam War in the United States. The Red Army in Japan. The Red Army faction in Germany. The Red Brigades in Italy. The uprising of May 68 in France. The Montoneros in Uruguay. The uprising in Czechoslovakia, and so on. A planetary revolt of educated youth. It's a strange phenomenon in some sense, that uprising of all the students in the world. It was the Red Years. After that, in the Université Paris 8, in Vincennes, it was practically every day. The class was transformed. We are going to destroy an American bank or to do many very interesting things which are not in the program. Okay, so that is after. And so I returned to Paris with Foucault, Deleuze, and finally it was also an existential beginning with my new woman, my second woman, Cécile Winter. I met her in University of Vincennes. She was also a militant of the same Maoist organizations than me, and she was also the study of philosophy, and so I was in the situation with her of a relationship complete in some sense, politics, love. It was practically inside all the conditions of philosophy. With Cécile Winter, I have one child, but which is an adopted child, because for physiologic reasons it was impossible for Cécile to have a child. And his name is Olivier, and this is a picture of Olivier. And during the 80s, we have finally this beautiful son, which comes from the Congo. And this one is very, it's a pleasure to see this picture. And here you can see Olivier too, which is to kill the monsters. Ah bon, attends. Je vais voir le dame parce que on fait un entracte.
D'accord.
Hein?
C'est une intermission.
A small
Oh,
pause.
sorry.
A small pause.
You want to slide this or did you cut?
Sorry? Yeah, I cut.
Je crois que le vide est justement ce qui n'a pas d'image. Donc quand vous faites une image du vide, vous savez que c'est une image qui est déjà pleine. Donc les images du vide, c'est toujours en réalité des images d'un plein qui a disparu. C'est d'ailleurs pas une invention, il y a des philosophies, notamment asiatiques, qui ont accordé une grande importance au fait qu'au début, il y a le néant. La religion a besoin du rien pour penser la création du monde par Dieu à partir de rien. La création ex nihilo. Seulement, Dieu, lui, c'est pas rien. Hein. C'est même le contraire de rien. C'est le contraire de rien. La philosophie essaie de faire, c'est peut-on penser le rapport de l'être au vide sans introduire Dieu? Le vide métaphysique, le vide véritable, le vide fondamental, c'est qu'il n'y aurait justement aucune multiplicité. Pas la multiplicité de l'eau, pas la multiplicité de l'air, pas la multiplicité des atomes, pas la multiplicité des molécules, mais véritablement la multiplicité de rien. Voilà. And you know, there is something in the pure revolt, the fascination by negativity. It's trouble, indecision, fear, anxiety, because it's also the refusal of the life as it is. Certainly, this world is not the world for the true life. What is the world for the true life? Oh, it's unclear. But we must destroy first. We must destroy first. And we shall see. Because the idea of the true life, what is the true life? An idea of what you want, what you desire, what is the norm for a new society, and so on. If we accept positively the consequences of all that, it's a necessity to be courageous. Subjectivation is always the transformation of anxiety in courage. Something marvelous to discover that the weaker can be the stronger. The weaker can be the stronger. The weaker can be the stronger. And how? How the weaker can be finally victorious? It's a question of ideology and organization. The militant and the party, in the classical term. Because ideology is a sort of general language in which we can discover, we can say that if we decide to do something now and here, you are becoming a subject. There is no final and transcendent ideology, naturally. It's a question of discussion between people and so on. So it's also a question of organization. If we have no success for this point, we have a complete separation between, on one side, rebels in general, the refusal of the world as it is, without any affirmative vision of the new world. And on the other side, we have the progressive death of all forms of collective organization. With the beginning of the 80s, we have a counter-revolution, the liberal revolution. And we are not victorious. We did not transform the global political situation. It's true. But it's the law of history. Before the Soviet Revolution of 1917, you have many historical failures of revolutions. The history of humanity is the history of the domination of humanity by small groups. And it's the case today. Everybody knows that sensibility, we cannot really do something against the army of the United States, the capitalist groups. The enemy is too strong, after all. Finally, we must obey. The real of the capitalist, the political real, is that everybody is in its corner of the society. You stay in your corner. A worker in a factory is in his corner, and a young student is in his corner too. And the relationship between the two, political relationship, does not exist. It's impossible. But we prove that it is possible. And even the failure does not destroy this lesson. I say that because there is a strong propaganda to say that all that was an illusion, that all that was practically nothing at all, that the only truth was the truth of the strongness of capitalism world. The 60s, the 70s, okay, illusion of the youth, and they were outside the true world. In some sense, it's true, we were outside the true world. It was precisely our point. We must be organized. We must resist. We must be able to resist to the police. It's right to rebel. It's right to rebel. Alors il faut revenir à l'événement. Nous avons dit l'événement, c'est le moment où quelque chose commence qui ne se déduit pas de ce qu'il y avait avant. L'exemple de l'amour est toujours le meilleur. Si vous rencontrez quelqu'un et que ça vous attire, qu'est-ce qui se passe là? Il se passe la création d'une possibilité. Est-ce que vous allez entrer dans cette possibilité ou pas? Vous avez le choix. Vous pouvez aborder la jeune femme ou le jeune homme qui vous attire et bon, vous allez essayer de voir quel est ce possible. Vous pouvez choisir de vous engager dans ce possible. J'appelle fidélité à l'événement. La fidélité est à l'événement. Elle n'est pas à la personne, elle est à l'événement, à la rencontre. J'appelle fidélité le fait de s'engager vraiment dans l'ouverture de la possibilité et d'en tirer toutes les conséquences. So, to be complete, it's also in this part of my life the encounter of what I must name my third wife, Judith Balso. Just two pictures concerning this situation. It's Judith with our son André. So I am finally, you observe, 4 children. Simon, my daughter Claude, which are the with Françoise, Olivier, which is my son with Cécile, and André, which is my son with Judith. And this photo is the militant one. It is why I want to you. It's Judith and me, and we were in houses which are named here foyer of workers coming from Africa, generally from Mali or sometimes from Cameroon. They are named here sans papier, without papers. We have comrades who cannot write, who cannot read a line, but they sing something really strong, and we write that they sing. In some sense, it is something glorious. It is something exceptional, something remarkable. And my philosophy is completely a result of this experience. A truth cannot be a German truth. A truth cannot be a French truth. And a truth cannot be a white truth or a black truth. Truth is something which transits from a world to another world. And there is a fundamental relationship between the idea of communism and the idea of truth. Because if you cannot have any truth, there is no hope to unify really all humanity under the same idea. There is no possibility to be uniquely under the law of being. Always you return to differences of existence. is why a truth is universal. It's the point, the radical point. The very maxim of the communism is not first no private property and so on. All that is consequences in some sense, possible consequences, material consequences. The point is the recognition of humanity as such, that is radical equality. And this is why relativism is our enemy today. Culturalism is our enemy. Not because we oppose the recognition of the existence of different worlds, not at all. Naturally, there is different language, different civilization, different histories, different people, and so on. We accept all differences. And relativism is always the idea that when you are in a world, you have your proper truth, and you cannot completely understand the other world. In that sort of context, the only unification is by money. The only thing which is in every world is money. And our world knows perfectly the value of money. But for us, it's the value of human being which is the question, not the value of money. And it is exactly that Plato explains. When you are outside, says Plato, you must return to the cave. It's a duty. You must return to the cave to say it's possible. Maybe it's difficult, maybe it's not immediately, maybe it's tomorrow or in 1 century, but it's possible. And to live inside with the possibility to be outside, it's another life. You know, when I was young, I was in the idea that I will be a great man. After 1968, it was in some sense different. It was more interesting and finally more glorious to be in this new trend of history than to be personally a great intellectual, a great philosopher, and so on. Okay, in some sense, my life is adequate to the dream of the child to be glorious. I cannot negate this point. It will be hypocrite. But I have an excuse. And my excuse is, it has been for me a necessity to be faithful to the revolutionary sequence. And this faithfulness was not easy first, and was certainly not the straight road to glory. And so it's my excuse before finally the judgment of history.